Mark Medish, welcome, and let's get right to it. The Russian government's dossier on JFK records, released last month to Representative Anna Paulina Luna. At JFK Facts, we have a team of translators working on translating the documents and the introductory essay, which we hope to release that soon. But I wanted to talk to you about what this thing is because there's been some furious debate on social media, Russian propaganda, disinformation. Representative Luna is a tool of the Russians. And then also in the JFK community, is there anything in there that tells us about the assassination and considerable interest there? But when I look at this thing, I see a very serious document. This isn't a gimmick or something. A lot of thought went into this, whatever its purpose is. So that's why I wanted to visit with you, a Russia expert, where we could start with the thing itself, the Russian government's dossier on JFK records, and we'll get to the politics later. But the thing itself, what is it? I turn to you because you're a Russian speaker, Russian analyst, Russian expert. And maybe just maybe before we get going, tell people a little bit about your Russia expertise. What is your experience with Russia, Russia government, US policy, and the like that makes you qualified to tell us about this document?
Well, thank you, Jeff. Great to be with you. And yeah, by way of background, I hesitate to call myself a Russia expert. I wonder whether there really are any experts. There are lots of knowledgeable opinions.
Good point.
Yeah, what was Churchill's line about a mystery wrapped in an enigma and so forth? It definitely applies to Soviet history and the Russian present. I did serve, fairly high levels in the U.S. government as a Russia advisor. I was senior director on the National Security Council at the White House under Bill Clinton in the last year of his administration, responsible for Russia, Ukraine, former Soviet Union, and I helped prepare the first 3 or 4 summit-level meetings between Clinton and his cabinet and Vladimir Putin, who had just become Russian president. Prior to that, I had been at the U.S. Treasury, also responsible for Russia and other parts of the world, and I had been at the State Department prior to that, responsible again for Eastern Europe and former Soviet Union at a more middle level. And I was trained in what was then Soviet studies. I'm a product of the Russian Research Center, but I'm also the product of Soviet emigre parentage on my father's side. My father was a Soviet post-World War II emigrate to the United States, who had several careers, one of which was as a fairly well-known Soviet studies scholar at American University.
So really, you've been immersed in Russia your whole life, really, right? I mean,
yeah, in yeah,
so
in one way or another, yes.
Yeah.
I hasten to add, my mother was a Viking, a Dane, 100%. So, like many Americans, I have a mixed background.
But working in policy, right? Like in those jobs, you're trying to define what the U.S. government should do, what are the choices it faces, and advising government officials about how to make those choices. Is that?
Yeah, at my level, I would say I was a very high level analyst and advisor, not deciding what the policy should be, but trying to assess what was going on and sift through the intelligence and then make recommendations on how to conduct bilateral relations and the like. Yeah.
And this new leader in the late 1990s, Vladimir Putin, what did you make of him as a policymaker at that time? His ascension to power. What did you expect from him? Or
it was a central question, obviously, at the time. He was first prime minister for about 5 or 6 months, and it became clear that he was in pole position to be the presidential successor of Boris Yeltsin, whom we had gotten to know quite well over the course of the 1990s. Putin was a far less well-known figure, and so a bit of a cipher. Obviously from KGB intelligence background, but then had reinvented himself a bit during the transition period, first in St. Petersburg, and then he was brought to Moscow for more senior government positions by the St. Petersburg clan, who were very, very prominent and powerful, particularly in economic reform. So I would say that about Putin, there is a tendency to read history backwards and to say that the Putin that we see today, 25 years later, was already fully formed and inevitable in 1999, 2000. And I would dispute that. I think that there were a lot of possible Putins that could have emerged from that early period. And he experimented with some of them and ended up, choosing the paths that he did. But nothing about it was really inevitable. And his early instincts, in fact, were quite open to a stronger bilateral relationship with the U.S. You'll recall that after Clinton, after 9/11, W. Bush was in power, Putin was the very first foreign leader actually to get through to W. Bush in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, and as a sort of outreach sign of international solidarity, concern about violent extremism and terrorism and so forth, which had been a theme of discussion with the Russians, going back into the 1990s as we ourselves were tracking Al-Qaeda.
Mm-hmm. So,
but at the same time, Putin was a very different character, I should add, was clearly a very different character, different profile from Boris Yeltsin, who I would say for his many flaws, including sort of lack of discipline, perhaps drinking too much and things like that, was very democratic at heart. I mean, he really was a post-Soviet figure, even though he had been, junior member on the Politburo. Whereas Putin had the credentials of the security services in the Soviet Union, so he had a different mental makeup.
Yeah.
From Yeltsin. That was clear from the beginning.
Well, that's a good background now to talking about the Russia dossier that the government has made public, because it is the product of the Putin government, and I think has to be read as sort of a statement of the government, a statement that they want to get across to America at this point. So, yeah, so tell us, is this Putin propaganda? How would you describe this in terms of a Putin government statement, the Russia dossier?
Well, and thank you. I have looked at it in some detail in the Russian original and some of the translations. Haven't studied the whole thing, and I hasten to add, I'm not an expert, on this particular period, but in a scholarly sense, but I am familiar with all of the context. A couple of observations. One, yes, it is a government document, and that's not unusual. I mean, it's from their it's from their archives.
Yeah.
If the U.S. were officially to share something, it would come from our archives as well. So yes, it is a government-produced compendium, and the narrative essay that accompanies it, all same thing by Mr. Artizov, who is long-serving librarian, like the librarian or the head of the National Archives in the U.S. would be. It's a person like that. The committee that approved this compendium is a striking one, very high level, representing the intelligence services and the foreign ministry. So as you can see, it's under the auspices of Sergey Naryshkin, who's the head of the foreign intelligence services and a close advisor of President Putin. General Gerasimov is on the panel. Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov is on the panel. So these are very prominent security officials
who have put their name on this thing. I mean,
yes,
this has their
on
blessing.
The supervising committee. Yes, so it has their imprimatur, that their authorization to share this narrative and this set of primary documents that they're sharing. So your other point about, does it serve a political purpose, a propaganda purpose? That's a very interesting and important question. And of course, the timing of the release also. Why now?
Yeah.
And we can get into that. I did note also that there is a sort of in quotes private corporate sponsor or public-private corporate sponsor, Transneft, which is the pipeline company, big pipeline company, which is headed by one of the former security colleagues of Putin and Naryshkin, named Mr. Tokarev. This documentary sharing, archival transfer has the imprimatur of the Russian government and its security services. So it needs to be assessed in that light, but that doesn't mean that the information it contains is not accurate. It's simply, why are they doing this? And then taking a close look at the editorial commentary that accompanies the primary documents is an interesting question to ask.
Yeah. So to go there, I thought I was struck that Artisov, who writes the kind of the introductory essay, he says in his opening paragraph that this is a matter of political dispute in the United States, JFK assassination records. And he uses a phrase like, "and a subject of internal struggle over control of intelligence agencies." So it seems to have an ear towards our discourse around President Trump, around his attacks on the deep state, on.
Well, I can't remember the exact words used, but it notes that this whole topic is a fraught topic, a controversial one,
right,
in U.S. political history.
Yes.
And you don't have to be an intelligence officer to know that.
Right.
The very fact that your site exists and you're probing, the documentary evidence that may be available about the Kennedy assassination, that's public. We're transparent about that. Everyone's been trying to get to the bottom of what happened that day in Dallas.
Right.
Who was really behind it. It wasn't Oswald alone. So, he refers to that controversy. And you're right. It again, with respect to timing, it comes in the context of Trump's promise to release. And so this is the Russian contribution to the release.
Why would they do this? A lot of effort. There's maybe a dozen archivist names attached to it. Obviously, these people, high-level people, have their names putting on it. So why would they be going to this effort in this way?
My first takeaway, and it could actually be my final and considered takeaway, is the reason they did this is that the group of individuals behind it, who were authorized to do the release, are actually trying to find pathways to stabilizing the bilateral relationship at a time of great tension over the Ukraine war and other issues. And what they're doing is they're in a sense, as you read through it, they're reminding American audiences of the fact that we've had previous times of great tension bilaterally. And the run-up to the Kennedy assassination was precisely one of those times. It was after the Bay of Pigs, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and during the escalation in Vietnam, obviously the crisis with the Berlin, and as I said, Vietnam, Laos, there were proxy wars. This was a time of hot wars going on and nuclear confrontation at the highest levels. And what they point to here is that JFK, in their minds, was, and in their leaders' minds, Khrushchev at the time and others, was a very important figure because even in that fraught context, he dared to, announce what he called a strategy for peace, this very famous speech he gave at American University, going back to American University, my father's PhD alma mater, June 1963, where Kennedy really opened the door for strategic nuclear arms control talks. It led, even after his death, to the Limited Test Ban Treaty and then a whole series of nuclear arms control treaties. So the message is that despite the tensions, we can still work together to solve critically important issues and avoid Armageddon. So I think, although they don't spell it out that way, as I read the history, that's what comes foremost to my mind.
Yeah, no.
On a personal note, I should add, full disclosure, my only connection with JFK is that I was physically present at his June 1963 speech at American University. And JFK handed my father his PhD diploma. I was in my mother's arms as a baby. So I have a photo of that. So that was my connection
but you were there
with JFK. I was there. I didn't know it at the time, but I was there.
Yeah.
So I was a baby. I was a Cuban Missile Crisis baby, but also a détente baby.
Mm-hmm. Well, to your point about this document as a kind of presentation of the Russian government as a reasonable actor who does business with the United States even in difficult circumstances. That's, to me, that's the story. That's the narrative of all these, of all these documents. And and I was struck in there that one of them, I don't know if you saw this, but Khrushchev distributes the American University speech to all the people in his government and authorizes the press to print the entire text. Like, that they were struck at the time that this was a very positive development for Russia, that the U.S. wanted to negotiate, and I think they're saying, and we reciprocated. That's one of the stories in the dossier.
Yep.
We were open to negotiations too.
Yeah, that comes through. That comes through. That from the Soviet point of view, JFK represented new thinking, but it's important to emphasize it was not linear. That again, it's in the context of proxy wars that JFK inherited from the Eisenhower administration. Mm-hmm. Already, Vietnam is well under incipient. Laos, again, the confrontation around East Berlin. Then in April of '61, just keep in mind, just months after Kennedy takes office, his administration approves the Bay of Pigs invasion, which is a debacle. Yeah. But it highlights the tension over Cuba, and so then, but then Kennedy, in the immediate aftermath of that, proposes meeting with Khrushchev in Vienna in June 1961. Mm-hmm. And this is where they begin to talk about these regional issues, but also prefigure a pathway forward on nuclear talks. Mm-hmm. So it's a both-and situation. And remember that key line in the June '63 speech. And you're right that Khrushchev circulated it to his cabinet and top advisors. Kennedy says something like, we have profound differences with the Soviet Union. We can have those differences and implicitly try to manage them. And so that's what points the way that we've got to avoid Armageddon. We've got to avoid an arms race that could end in total catastrophe. Even though we've got hot conflicts going around already, or precisely because we have these hot conflicts going on, we've got to prevent the risk of escalation. So I think on that level, what really comes across from the documents shared is how much Khrushchev believed that. even though Khrushchev himself was a very complicated character and he was okaying the escalation of many of the proxy wars himself.
Yeah.
He believed in spreading communism globally, and we will bury the capitalist system, et cetera, et cetera. Remember the shoe at the
Yeah.
UN.
Yeah.
So, right. But there's this thread coming through the Kennedy rhetoric and his diplomatic actions and back channels of let us engage in risk reduction, let's talk, and ideally codify agreements in the shape of arms control treaties. Kennedy did not live to see those, but it continued after his assassination. Now, let's hasten to add that this leads to a lot of conspiracy speculation that those who oppose the peace agenda, wherever they might have been, in the dark, the deep state or somewhere, that they had a motive in, taking out Kennedy because he was proposing something that was not in the interests of the military-industrial complex.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Or you could say from the other side that the hawks in the Soviet Union saw this peace talk as threatening because they were, their bread was buttered through confrontation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not suggesting I agree with any of that, but you can see the logic that it actually fuels conspiracy theories that, Kennedy had the plan for peace, and Kennedy was going to end the Vietnam War, and Kennedy was, going to have détente with the Soviets and the godless communists, and this had to be stopped.
Well, another theme that runs throughout the dossier is that the Russians do not believe the story that the Americans tell them, that they've concluded that Oswald acted alone. And Khrushchev finds the claim practically laughable when
Right.
There's a conversation with Drew Pearson in the dossier. On the one hand, they're taking pains to be cooperative. Here's everything we know about this guy in his time in the Soviet Union. There's a memo in there from the head of the KGB. Here's what we made of this guy in his time, which they didn't think he was a spy. They didn't think that he didn't act like a spy. So that's another theme. But just to go back to the contemporary resonance, right? That this is our official history of 1963. You're saying implicitly the people in the Russian government who want this out are looking to justify negotiations with the West or find a path out of Ukraine? Is it that explicit, or how would you? What's the contemporary message that they're trying to get across with this history?
It's something along those lines. I mean, I think, Sergey Naryshkin's presence on the board that approved this, I think is quite significant. He was, of course, again, head of the external intelligence services, and he was those talks with Burns were, key opportunity for looking for an exit ramp. It didn't come to pass, but I think that this circle probably represents a group that would like to find some kind of an exit ramp. Obviously more on Russia's terms. There is a bit of an outreached hand through the archives of history to the United States, saying, we've had bad times before and we found a way to reduce tensions. Shouldn't we try to do that again? I could be overreading it, but I think there's a real element of that.
Expand a little bit on talks between the Soviet Foreign Intelligence Service and the CIA on the brink or right after the beginning of the Ukraine war between Bill Burns and this Sergey Naryshkin, who is basically not the author of this thing, but the mastermind of it, or it's coming from him. What did go on at the beginning of the war, and was there an off ramp? Were there negotiations? What happened there? What do we know?
Well, we could spend many hours on this, and not everything is known. But my own take is that the Russians made a gross miscalculation very early on. They assumed that the Ukrainian government of Zelensky would fall very quickly, either of its own weight or thanks to a coup d'etat, and so that the Russian military involvement would not need to be, kind of full-scale invasion leading to a protracted war. I don't think that was the scenario they were playing for. If you look at the force levels that they had mobilized, all of the Western intelligence suggested that they were prepared to do something, which is obviously what Bill Burns leaked in the fall of 2021, but that they didn't actually have the force level mobilized for a full-scale campaign. So it was a bit ambiguous, shall we say, and that intelligence that the Kremlin, that Putin relied on about the inevitable fall of the Zelensky government proved to be incorrect. And so the Russian incursion, clearly failed early, and it led very quickly to talks on a ceasefire. These were well known. They were occurring in Istanbul and in Minsk, with Ukrainians and Russians and the Erdogan, president of Turkey, serving as a mediator or convener, Lukashenko as well, in Belarus, and they outlined at that point a kind of MOU of what a standstill could look like. And that fell apart. And people debate why that happened. Some people, particularly on the Ukrainian side, say, well, we were never really interested. We were never about to do that. I don't think that's correct. I think you can go and you can see Zelensky on Ukrainian television, even after the Bucha massacres were disclosed, explaining why it was necessary to end this war quickly, because it was not in Ukraine's interest to be plunged in to, but that, unfortunately, I think what happened is the war escalated, and initially counter offensive was launched. The Ukrainians were very successful at pushing the Russians back throughout 2022. And along the way, there were explorations of other exit ramps. And I think Naryshkin, Burns were involved in back channel talks about, how can we stop this? Mm-hmm. And it just didn't happen. And instead we had, further escalation from both sides. Basically, the West put a bet on a further counteroffensive in 2023 that would drive the Russians out or lead to victory that everyone talked about. And when the history books are written, along the way, the balance sort of shifted. The Russians adapted their tactics, rearmed, came up with a different approach, different leadership, and have been making incremental gains on the ground ever since then. The consequence of which is that tragically, in order to get a deal, a standstill, all the relevant sides need to want to do it at the same time, and that's very hard to orchestrate. If people think that they can achieve a better position on the ground. So I'm sorry, it's a long-winded answer, but there is no simple answer to, the back channel off ramps. This is, once you're in a war, in a proxy war, there's a certain logic to continuing. Right. We had the same experience, I should add, during the Korean War, in which the U.S. was obviously directly involved. My father served there in the U.S. Army. There were about 1,000 meetings, military to military, in order to get to the truce, the ceasefire. I took almost 2 years of a stalemate, and then these talks. So there are no easy off ramps to wars, unfortunately.
But what you're
once
saying
they're
is that
started.
this group around Naryshkin uh, historically was interested and took steps to negotiate an end to the Ukraine war, and this is an expression of that same impulse of a group or a faction within the Putin government.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Hmm.
I think it's a faction of like-minded senior officials from the intelligence services and the power ministries who are at a minimum interested in exploring options for ceasefire, for an exit.
Hmm.
Um, they're very careful about it. They're not going to go out there and look like they're giving up or
Hmm.
I mean, again, this is part of the problem of a war situation,
Right.
that anyone who talks about peace risks being denounced as, guess what, Chamberlain at Munich or something like that, right?
Right.
We think that only happens on our side. It happens on all sides.
Right.
We think we're the only people who are patriotic. No, patriotism is in all countries.
Hmm.
And you're at risk of being denounced as weak or a collaborator or a traitor if you talk peace too early or too publicly.
Uh-huh.
So this is all quite nuanced. But yes, I think there is a group, let's call them pragmatists, who are looking for exit ramps. And what they're doing here is they've located a historical analogy in the bilateral relationship, this JFK moment, this Khrushchev JFK moment, to say, wait, we've been here before. What lessons can we jointly learn about that period that might help us achieve some kind of détente?
And so if they're sending this message, who are they sending it to? Who is this for our foreign policy elite? Is this for our media? Is this for our Trump media? Or all of the
Yeah,
above, maybe?
I think multiple audiences, and they probably understand that different audiences will see it quite differently. But yes, I think to the elite, it is a kind of outreached hand, cautiously outreached hand. I think so.
Hmm.
Um, and let me underline another lesson from that period, and that is that Kennedy was willing to meet with Khrushchev. Right, he's the one who proposed the Vienna Summit, again, June 1961, with the godless communist.
Yeah.
Right, just as Nixon had done the kitchen debates with Khrushchev. Somehow the US has gotten into a state where we believe that diplomacy is a reward to other countries as opposed to a necessary tool. In my
Uh-huh.
view, we need the State Department not to talk with our allies. We need it to talk with our adversaries and with fence sitters. Um, but in recent times, I think as a consequence of the triumphalism of the 1990s, the American foreign policy establishment has gotten into this, very binary view of the world, black and white, and we're only going to talk with the guys with the white hats, the guys who like us.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so when you see this, I mean, maybe you don't see it, but the social media discourse about this is Russian disinformation.
Mm-hmm.
This is what people have criticized Representative Luna for releasing
Right,
this
right.
document. What do let's talk a little bit about the politics of the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what I was trying to get at earlier with how there can be a conspiracy theory around any event, any news event, any sharing of information. Well, is this information or is it disinformation? So again, we're going through that cycle. I would say that the documents shared, curated archival documents, professionally developed. Um, you know, are there forgeries in there? I don't know. I don't think so. It looks like a competent sort of bit of historiography. Is
Yeah.
it the complete story? I don't know. Um, you know, uh, uh, are the Russians trying to uh, point point noses in a different direction? Because there really was some Russian intelligence, Soviet intelligence involvement in in
Mhm.
Oswald in the JFK assassination. Um, you know, and the mirror image on our side was there CIA involvement, FBI involvement. What did they know about Oswald? So we're kind of in a hall of mirrors here that's very hard to get out of because you can always hypothesize a conspiracy level. Um, I can see an argument that, gee, these documents, the timing of it, aren't the Russians protesting? Methinks the lady doth protest too much.
Uh-huh.
Why all this? Why now?
Right.
What are you trying to hide?
Uh-huh.
Why are you trying to divert attention? Um, I think the answer to that is yes, there is a propaganda motive here, but it has to do with what I was discussing earlier, which is, hey, why can't we engage in détente talks?
Uh-huh.
And it's the propaganda is not actually about the underlying, you know, who killed JFK. Um, I don't think there are any revelations in what has been shared on that. There's all the speculation, um, and as you pointed out, uh, Russians believe that it must have been a conspiracy. Oswald couldn't have been Oswald alone. Americans believe that. As far as I know, almost everyone in the Kennedy family believed that. Lyndon Johnson, I know, believe that. Others believe that. And are they right? Are they wrong? I don't know. I would analogize with 9/11 a bit here, though, because when 9/11 happened, everyone assumed that there must be a much, much bigger conspiracy behind 9/11. How could this happen? But actually, it does look like a rather small group of Al Qaeda terrorists came up with a diabolical clever, low tech scheme to wreak havoc on the United States. And there actually was no follow up, and there weren't other major shoes to drop.
Right.
So
It was just a bunch of guys, right? It
it was a
wasn't some
bunch of
worldwide
guys.
organization. It was just this group of
No,
guys who figured out how to do this.
they figured out how to do it, and they got through the open doors at just the right moments. And as we learned through our subsequent investigations and disclosures, our intelligence services actually had a number of the dots on their radar. They just didn't connect them.
Yeah.
And so the embarrassment of our services is not that they were part of the conspiracy to do 9/11. It's actually a conspiracy of incompetence,
Yeah.
right? That they had the information, but they couldn't do the pattern recognition quickly enough for bureaucratic reasons or technological reasons,
Hmm.
lack of communication from left hand to right hand, etc. And I've always thought that uh, the JFK assassination is sort of a similar category. That there's a lot of really strange behavior on the part of the American services,
Hmm.
but it could be explained by sheer incompetence and embarrassment that they actually knew a lot more about Oswald in real time
Hmm.
and never did anything about
Hmm.
it, and were maybe leaning in the wrong direction, letting
Hmm.
him continue to do his thing, as it were.
Right.
Um, I would add, as a Soviet, let's say Russia Soviet expert, I was always concerned about Oswald's time in the Soviet Union. I mean, that was not a normal thing,
Yeah.
that individual Americans just show up over there and then spend some time, end up marrying a Soviet bride and then coming back out. An odd, unhealthy dimension to Oswald that merited close attention from a counterintelligence point of view.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would just respond to that a little bit about uh, is it incompetence or was there a larger design about it? I mean, I think what we've learned is definitely there's a legitimate counterintelligence interest in Oswald, but once Oswald's back in the United States, that interest continues, and it doesn't have anything to do with him being a defector. And I don't think that the behavior of senior CIA officials can be explained by embarrassment. I think that there's
Yeah,
operational activity there that, uh, uh, and I mean, maybe they were embarrassed about the operational activity, but it didn't have something to do with the assassination. I don't know that's
yeah,
cutting it mighty fine for me. Uh,
yeah.
uh, but to stay with the dossier, and on
But
that
let me jump
point,
in. I
yeah,
hear you. I hear you on that, and I do agree. I think the what we've learned, and thanks to your efforts and many of your colleagues who are researching this, uh, what we've learned about the U.S. intelligence services involvement with Oswald is itself unhealthy. It is very hard to explain
yeah,
what they saw in him, why they kept utilizing him.
yeah,
It's possible then that Oswald somehow stumbles into this other plot of his own,
right,
and that everyone is caught swimming naked.
right,
It's like, holy shit, our guy just did he just kill the president?
yeah,
We didn't see that coming,
yeah,
and then you've got to explain why is it that as Kennedy drives through Dealey Plaza, one spot along the way in Dallas, why are so many intelligence and counterintelligence operatives present in that area, which is, has come out in a lot of the reporting. It's like, wait, why are so many people there?
yeah, yeah,
What is really going on here?
yeah.
Because I've heard reports of like, you know, CIA having photographs of FBI counterintelligence at Dealey Plaza and maybe vice versa, and Cuban agents.
Well,
Well,
you had
wait,
an army intelligence unit that was
yeah,
mobilized for the event.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean the dossier doesn't uh, on the question of authenticity. I would say a couple things. One, some of these documents are known in the JFK literature precisely
yeah.
because they did share them with the U.S. government early on, and became a source of information. I thought that it was uh, the dossier is also taking the high road in sort of saying, in trying to defuse conspiratorial speculation and saying, there was conspiratorial speculation because our archives weren't completely open. And now we're
Yeah.
going to open them so that to dispel that, and that we weren't being conspiratorial, we were being cooperative, which enhances, reinforces the larger message. We're a responsible government that you can negotiate with, and even in times of trouble.
We wouldn't assassinate a U.S. president, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's certainly part of it.
Yeah. Um,
But they do share things like the Bolshakov, William Walton, I guess, aide memoir of the meeting, which was quite interesting.
yeah. So
Where
that's the
Walton, who,
one document that is new to JFK researchers. We knew that Robert Kennedy had sent William Walton, a friend of his and Jackie's, to Moscow with this message, but we never knew exactly what he said. And now we have Bolshakov's account of that meeting, where practically the first words out of Walton's mouth are, "It was definitely a major political conspiracy." Um, Even if Oswald was,
which again was common currency among all Kennedy intimates. I mean, they all assumed this must have been
yeah,
a much bigger plot. And
right,
I understand the sentiment. I mean, the shock, how could it not? I mean, how could you possibly assassinate a U.S. president? It
right.
must have been a big, big conspiracy.
And so that
It
was
couldn't have been John Booth by himself.
right. Um, and that was December 9th, 1963. It was 3 weeks after the assassination.
Yeah,
So
very,
very,
very
very,
soon thereafter.
very,
Yeah.
very soon thereafter. Um,
And again, the structure of Walton's message, as far as we understand it, is very much what you and I discussed at the outset, which is a reassurance to the Soviet leadership through Bolshakov, who was an intelligence officer, and Bolshakov had been one of those back channel, you know, communicators, helped set up the Vienna summit, for example, and helped to defuse the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Hmm.
as a back channel with Americans. So Walton goes to meet with him to convey the message that, yes, this new guy has come to power, LBJ, but rest assured that there's an intent to continue the Kennedy line on, peace, détente. Um, Although Walton, I think, as I recall, does cast some aspersions or makes critical remarks about LBJ's capacities,
Right.
and says that RFK will come afterwards as he'll be the next president. So,
Yeah,
but it was a message of reassurance.
that was an interesting line in the memo. Walton tells Bolshakov, um, you know, I've seen in the Russian press that Robert Kennedy is more reactionary than his brother. Don't believe that. He's a different character, but he has the same policies. And he uses a phrase like the most promising figure in American politics. It's like he's
Yeah,
selling them on a future President Robert Kennedy, right from the start,
for, oh, for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, but that reflects, I think, personal bias, of being an intimate of the Kennedys, and
Yeah.
what he says about JFK, about LBJ, of course, is way off the mark. I mean, LBJ had already been a very serious political figure and legislator, and I would argue turned out to be a much more significant president on domestic policy than JFK. I mean, LBJ actually managed to deliver things that JFK only talked about. And
Right. And
so the comment about LBJ is typical, you know, East Coast elite insulting, Texas hick boy
yeah,
LBJ.
yeah,
There were so many around JFK who never wanted LBJ as the vice president. It was a strategic choice. It didn't come naturally,
yeah,
um, though it turned out to be a smart move politically.
yeah. Anything else stand out to you, either in the memos, the documents, and even related to what we've talked about or not related? Uh, in,
Well, again, I think we should always approach handoffs of this kind with a degree of skepticism about motivation, and then a very careful analysis of the historical veracity. On its face, the compendium looks like a well curated, professional, scholarly set of archives, and so it merits study. Um, and then on the other level, the more political level is, well, are there some lessons from that period that are worth learning? Not lessons about the JFK assassination per se, but lessons about the bilateral relationship and how actually we do have these shared interests in preserving a future for the planet, even though we have deep differences. For me, that's the big takeaway.
Mhm.
And I view this as a valuable moment, teaching moment, let's say. Even though motives should be, it's trust. What is it? Uh,
Trust but verify.
yeah, trust but verify. The Reagan line: trust but
Yeah,
verify.
yeah,
Yeah, that's valid. That's the world we live in. That mutual assured destruction actually should discipline our minds, and we should get back to this hard work of trying to minimize the risks of uncontrolled escalation.
Let me just refer people to your own work. We're stepping back and looking at the big picture. You've written a very interesting essay about the state of the world, which has a lot to do with the Ukraine war in particular, but international relations in general. For The Spectator.
Yeah, about geopolitics and what kind of world order disorder are we entering here?
It seems this widespread agreement, we are entering a new world, that world of the post-World War II, NATO, whatever that was, that period is now coming to an end and we're moving on to something different. And that's kind of what you're
Yeah,
saying,
and
right?
and by the way, yeah, and Tom Friedman picked up my article, the co-author our article, in his column earlier this week. Saying we're in a phase of polycrisis, and Tom Friedman can't really come up with a metaphor, a new metaphor. Remember, this is Tom Friedman who told us the world is flat.
Right.
Globalization was going to lead to a great convergence, and he now, very smart guy, very smart observer, is conceding that actually the world looks quite bumpy, not very flat. It's hills and valleys. And so, I think we all have to approach, all us foreign policy experts need to approach the current situation with a high degree of humility, because we've been used to grand narratives about the post-Cold War era, again, globalization, the great convergence, and it hasn't come to pass. So what did we get wrong? And how can we try to reduce the risks of uncontrolled, disorder, chaos?
Mm-hmm.
Can we manage the disorder? How do we do that? What institutions do we need to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And so a sense that what the United States and the Soviets and other great powers tried to build up after the Second World War, a lot of those arrangements, those dispensations, the United Nations system, the WTO, International Criminal Court, you can go down the line, they're kind of crumbling in terms of relevance in front of our eyes. So we can either pretend, we can pay them lip service, or we can start doing the hard work of rebuilding, which is what I think we're going to need to do. And I just hope we can do that before a deeper crisis hits.
Yeah. So, a fascinating essay and a good snapshot of where we are. The great rewiring.
Yes.
In the Spectator.
Yeah, it's in the Washington Spectator, and it also ran on another Substack called SecDev.
Uh-huh. Yes. So I urge people to look for that. That's really the context in which we're studying this Russia JFK dossier. That's why
I think that's right.
It's not. It's important about what it tells us about 1963, but I want people to focus on and think about what does it tell us about today and this context of polycrisis of a changing world order. That has to be considered part of the JFK story right now.
I agree. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you, Mark. Fascinating conversation. I look forward to talking again.
Likewise.
Hey, everybody. I wanted to call your attention to one surefire way to deepen your knowledge of the assassination of President Kennedy. And that's to read my 3 books about the CIA. A trilogy of spies that tells how the assassination actually unfolded in the eyes of CIA insiders. You see, my work on JFK's assassination is rooted not in the literature of conspiracy, but in the history of CIA operations. And that makes all the difference when it comes to understanding the events that culminated on November 22nd, 1963. You'll want to check out my 3 CIA books that tell the story of the founding generation of the Central Intelligence Agency and what 3 insiders actually thought about JFK's assassination. Meet charismatic Station Chief Winston Scott as he surveils Lee Harvey Oswald 6 weeks before Dallas. Meet urbane CIA Director Richard Helms as he fends off President Richard Nixon's attempts to blackmail him over JFK's assassination. Meet James Angleton, the ingenious, paranoid, and sinister counterintelligence chief who had controlled the agency's file on Oswald since 1959. In these books, you'll see the real historical foundation of the events that led to President Kennedy's assassination, and you'll understand this event in a much deeper way. Check out my books at jeffersonmorleybooks.com. You can buy all of these books there, as well as my other nonfiction book, Snowstorm in August. So check out the Trilogy of Spies.